Most of Nikola Tesla's inventions were not merely mechanical devices or electrical curiosities. They were instruments designed to harmonize with the very pulse of the cosmos, to tap into the fundamental wheelwork of nature that operates beyond the visible spectrum of ordinary human perception. When we speak of Tesla, we are not speaking of a conventional engineer bounded by the limitations of copper wires and chemical batteries, but of a visionary who perceived the Earth itself as a colossal conductor, a terrestrial globe charged with limitless energy waiting to be harnessed through the mastery of resonance and frequency. It is within this realm of high-frequency currents and telluric transmission that we find one of the most enduring and unsettling mysteries of the 20th century, the potential theoretical connection between Tesla's wireless energy experiments at Wardenclyffe and the cataclysmic Tunguska event of 1908. To understand this connection is to step away from the safety of standard geological explanations and venture into the domain of directed energy, where the manipulation of the ionosphere and the standing waves of the Earth could theoretically result in a discharge of apocalyptic magnitude. The date was June 30th, 1908. In the remote Siberian wilderness near the Podkamennaya Tunguska River, an explosion occurred that defies easy categorization even to this day. It was not a war. It was not a volcano. It was a blast estimated to be 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima, flattening 80 million trees over an area of 2,150 square kilometers. The shockwave circumnavigated the globe twice. Barometers in London detected the disturbance, and the night skies over Europe and Asia glowed with such spectral luminosity that one could read a newspaper at midnight without artificial light. Conventional science attributes this event to the airburst of a stony meteoroid, or a comet fragment, a bolide that disintegrated before striking the ground. Yet, no crater was ever found. No significant meteoric fragments were recovered that could satisfactorily explain the sheer scale of the energy release. This absence of physical evidence opens the door to alternative hypotheses, leading us straight to the laboratory of Nikola Tesla and his profound assertions regarding the transmission of electrical energy through the Earth and atmosphere without wires. Consider the timing. In the months leading up to the Tunguska event, Tesla was deeply embroiled in his work at the Wardenclyffe Tower on Long Island. His stated goal was the wireless transmission of intelligence and power to any point on the globe. He spoke of turning the Earth into a colossal tuning fork, exciting the planet's natural resonant frequencies to transport energy instantaneously. Tesla explicitly claimed that his transmitter could project a wave of energy that could be focused at any specific antipodal point on the globe. He was experimenting with the concept of a death ray or teleforce, though at this stage his primary focus was the transmission of industrial power. However, the physics underlying both concepts are dangerously similar. If one can transmit enough power to light a city wirelessly across an ocean, one can, theoretically, focus that same power to a single point with devastating consequences if the standing waves are improperly managed or intentionally directed. The core of this theoretical link lies in the concept of scalar waves and the electrical resonance of the Earth. Tesla discovered that the Earth vibrates at a specific frequency, later identified as the Schumann resonance. He believed that by pumping energy into the ground at this specific resonant frequency, he could create a standing wave that would grow in intensity as it bounced back and forth between the transmitter and the antipodal point. It is similar to pushing a child on a swing. If you push at exactly the right moment, the swing goes higher and higher with very little effort. Tesla's push was millions of volts of electricity. The Wardenclyffe Tower was essentially a massive magnifying transmitter designed to pump this electrical charge into the Earth's crust and the ionosphere simultaneously. If Tesla had indeed fired up the tower in the summer of 1908, aiming to test the limits of his transmission capabilities, he would have been sending a longitudinal wave through the Earth's core or a pulse through the upper atmosphere. Now, imagine the geometry of the situation. When a wave is transmitted from a point on a sphere, it travels to the opposite side, the antipode, where it converges. If the energy is not retrieved or dissipated at that convergence point, it accumulates. The result is a tremendous localized buildup of potential energy. While Tunguska is not the precise geometric antipode of Long Island, that would be in the Indian Ocean, Tesla's understanding of steering electrical waves was not limited to simple straight lines. He claimed the ability to direct these waves using the ionosphere as a waveguide. The path of the wave could be influenced by the magnetic field lines of the Earth and the varying conductivity of the crust. It is theoretically plausible, within the framework of Tesla's own physics, that a high-energy pulse directed towards the polar regions to test communication with the Peary expedition, which Tesla had expressed interest in, could have overshot or been diverted, finding its ground zero in the desolate taiga of Siberia. We must also consider the accounts of Tesla's behavior during this period. Historians and biographers have noted that Tesla requested maps of the least inhabited parts of the Earth from the Library of Congress shortly before the event. Why would an inventor focused on illuminating cities and providing power to industry need detailed maps of the Siberian wilderness? This detail, while circumstantial, aligns uncomfortably well with the notion of a planned test firing. If Tesla intended to demonstrate the power of his transmitter, he would need a target where the risk to human life was minimal, yet the impact would be observable or measurable. Siberia fits this profile perfectly. Furthermore, in the days following the event, Tesla shifted his rhetoric. He ceased talking about high-power transmission for a time and focused more on the transmission of small signals. It is as if he realized the terrifying potential of the forces he was playing with. Did he realize that he had unlocked a Pandora's box of planetary resonance that could shatter the world as easily as a soprano shatters a wine glass? The physics of the Tunguska explosion itself bears hallmarks that are consistent with a scalar electrical discharge. Eyewitnesses described a column of blue light, a sky split in two, and a heat so intense it felt as if their shirts were on fire. These descriptions correlate with high-energy plasma phenomena. A meteoric impact typically creates a distinct trajectory and a kinetic impact crater. An electrical discharge, however, occurs as an instantaneous release of energy between the ionosphere and the ground, or a subterranean breakdown of dielectric resistance. The butterfly pattern of the flattened trees points to a blast wave originating from a point source above the ground, which is consistent with both an airburst meteor and a directed energy accumulation in the atmosphere. However, the lack of meteoric dust in the peat bogs of the region remains a point of contention. While some microscopic silicate spheres have been found, their quantity and composition do not decisively prove a stony impactor of sufficient size. This ambiguity leaves room for the electromagnetic hypothesis. Let us delve deeper into the mechanism of the death ray, or peace ray, as Tesla later called it. He described a device that could project particles of microscopic size or purely electrical force to varying distances. While Wardenclyffe was ostensibly for radio and power, the fundamental principle, creating a channel of highly ionized air through which a massive electrical current could flow, is pertinent. If the Tunguska event was an electrical phenomenon, it would represent a breakdown of the Earth's atmospheric capacitor. The Earth and the ionosphere act as two plates of a giant global capacitor. Tesla's tower was a machine designed to manipulate the charge on these plates. If he induced a massive potential difference that exceeded the dielectric breakdown voltage of the atmosphere over Siberia, the result would be exactly what was observed: a column of fire, a massive shock wave, and an electromagnetic pulse that disrupted compasses and caused geomagnetic storms. Furthermore, the weird luminous phenomena reported across Europe and Russia for days after the explosion are strongly indicative of upper atmospheric disturbances, specifically the ionization of the upper layers of the atmosphere. Tesla's experiments in Colorado Springs had already demonstrated his ability to create artificial auroras and light up the sky with wireless energy. The bright nights of 1908 are exactly the kind of side effect one would expect from a massive global-scale excitation of the ionosphere. A meteor passing through the atmosphere leaves a dust train that can cause noctilucent clouds, but the electrical disruption of the upper atmosphere would create a pervasive glow consistent with auroral mechanisms, which is what Tesla claimed his transmission system would achieve, lighting up the sky for safe navigation at sea. This theoretical framework forces us to reconsider the nature of the world wireless system. It wasn't just about radio. It was about coupling human machinery with the planetary electrical circuit. The Tunguska event serves as a grim potential data point in this grand experiment. It suggests that the Earth is not an inert rock, but a dynamic electrical entity that can react violently when its fundamental frequencies are tampered with. Tesla often spoke of the Earth as being alive with electrical vibrations. Did he accidentally bruise the living planet? Did he send a signal so powerful that the Earth flinched? The possibility that a single man, working with the primitive technology of the early 20th century, could trigger a geophysical event of such magnitude is terrifying. It implies that the leverage point of planetary physics is more accessible than we dare to admit. This theoretical framework forces us to examine the very nature of the energy Tesla was manipulating, a form of energy transmission that modern physics often conflates with standard radio waves, yet which Tesla insisted was fundamentally different. To comprehend how an explosion in Siberia could originate from a tower in New York, one must grasp the distinction between Hertzian waves and what Tesla called non-Hertzian, or longitudinal waves. Standard radio transmission, the kind used by Marconi and verified by Hertz, involves transverse waves, ripples of electromagnetic radiation that travel through the air, radiating outward like light from a candle. The intensity of these waves diminishes rapidly with distance. The further you are from the source, the weaker the signal becomes, following the inverse square law. For Tesla, this was a wasteful, inefficient method of moving power. He viewed Hertzian radiation not as the primary mechanism, but as a loss, a leakage of energy that should have been confined. Tesla's method relied on the propagation of longitudinal waves through the Earth itself, utilizing the planet as the primary conductor. Imagine a long, fluid-filled pipe. If you push a piston at one end, the pressure is transmitted almost instantly to the other end, not because the fluid molecules travel that distance in a microsecond, but because the wave of pressure moves through the medium. This is a longitudinal wave. Tesla believed that by injecting high-voltage impulses into the ground, he could create a similar compression wave of electricity. This wave would not radiate into space and dissipate. It would traverse the globe with virtually no loss of power. The Wardenclyffe Tower was effectively the piston, and the Earth was the fluid-filled pipe. If you drive this piston with sufficient force and at the precise resonant frequency of the container, the Earth, you create a situation where the energy does not just travel, it multiplies. This is the terrifying beauty of resonance. A soldier marching across a bridge can cause it to collapse if his steps match the bridge's natural frequency. Tesla was not just marching on the bridge, he was pounding it with a steam hammer. The infrastructure required to achieve this was as titanic as the theory behind it. Beneath the iconic wooden lattice tower at Wardenclyffe, which rose 187 feet into the air, lay a labyrinth of technology that was far more critical to the operation than the visible structure. Tesla had excavated a central shaft, 12 feet square, and lined with timber, dropping 120 feet into the ground. At the bottom of this shaft, he drove iron pipes another 300 feet down, seeking the water table and the electrically conductive strata of the deep earth. This was the root system of his machine, designed to grip the planet's electrical backbone. This grounding system was the true secret of the magnifying transmitter. It allowed the tower to pump electrons into and out of the Earth at rates that were unprecedented. When the transmitter was active, it was not merely broadcasting a signal, it was breathing electricity in and out of the planet's crust, creating a rhythmic oscillation of the ground charge that would expand and contract with the frequency of his generators. Now, consider the interaction between this telluric current and the atmosphere. The mushroom cap, or cupola, at the top of the tower was a 55-ton conductive dome designed to hold a massive electrostatic charge. Tesla's plan involved charging this dome to millions of volts until the air around it broke down, creating a conductive path to the ionosphere. In essence, he was creating a wire made of plasma, an artificial lightning bolt that connected the ground to the edge of space. Once this connection was established, the entire globe ionosphere cavity acts as a waveguide. Energy pumped into the ground would travel to the antipode, while energy pumped into the sky would theoretically be guided by the ionosphere. If these two waves, the ground wave and the sky wave, were phased correctly, they would meet at a specific target location. Where they intersected, the potential difference would be catastrophic. The ground would be positively charged, the sky negatively charged, or vice versa, and the dielectric insulation of the atmosphere in between would be crushed under the stress, resulting in a sudden, explosive release of pure electrical energy. This mechanism explains the missing crater of Tunguska. If a rock hits the ground, it digs a hole. But if the atmosphere itself detonates, if the very air is ripped apart by an electrical overload, the blast wave comes from above. The trees at Tunguska were knocked down in a radial pattern, pointing away from a specific epicenter, but the trees directly at ground zero were left standing, stripped of their branches, resembling telephone poles. This is characteristic of a high-altitude airburst, where the downward pressure is vertical, compressing the tree rather than knocking it over. While a disintegrating comet could cause this, so too could a scalar interferometer scalar pulse, where two longitudinal waves converge and interfere constructively. The energy density at the convergence point would create a plasma ball, a localized sun that would expand explosively, searing the landscape with thermal radiation before the shock wave arrived. The heat reported by the Evenki natives, heat that burned the clothes off their backs and boiled the water in the river, is consistent with the intense thermal flash of a sudden plasma formation. You might wonder why, if Tesla had achieved such a feat, he did not immediately claim credit. He was, after all, desperate for funding. J.P. Morgan had withdrawn his support, and creditors were circling Wardenclyffe like vultures. A demonstration of godlike power, the ability to flatten a forest on the other side of the world, would surely have secured his financial future and the dominance of his technology. But consider the psychological weight of the event. Tesla was a humanist. He sought to liberate humanity from the drudgery of labor through free energy, not to forge a weapon of mass destruction. If he realized that his test had gotten out of hand, that a slight miscalculation had devastated a region of the Earth, the horror would have been paralyzing. To admit he caused Tunguska would be to admit that his technology was too dangerous for humanity to possess. It would invite military seizure of his lab and a legacy of destruction rather than creation. There is a subtle but telling piece of evidence in his later writings. Years after the event, when discussing his death ray or teleforce weapon in the 1930s, Tesla claimed that the device could send concentrated beams of particles through the free air of such tremendous energy that they will bring down a fleet of 10,000 enemy airplanes at a distance of 200 miles. He spoke of this with absolute certainty, not as a theoretical possibility, but as a proven fact. Where did he get this certainty? He had not built a new tower. He had no new funding for large-scale experiments. Is it possible that his certainty came from the data of 1908? That he knew the weapon worked because he had already fired it once? The specificity of his later claims suggests an empirical basis, a knowledge derived from a successful, albeit terrifying, experiment. He knew the power density was achievable because he had likely seen the reports of the sky split in two over Siberia. Furthermore, we must analyze the geophysical signature of the event in the context of the electric universe theory, a framework that expands upon Tesla's insights. This theory posits that craters on planets and moons are often not formed by physical impacts, but by cosmic electrical discharges, gigantic lightning bolts between celestial bodies. The Tunguska site shares anomalies with these electrical scars. The presence of strange, microscopic metallic spheres in the soil, often cited as evidence of a meteorite, can also be produced by high-current electrical arcs fusing the soil. This process, known as fulgurite formation, occurs when lightning strikes sand. On a macro scale, a scalar discharge would vaporize the soil and rock, recondensing it into tiny glassy spheres. The magnetization of the soil at the epicenter also points to a powerful magnetic event, which is inseparable from an electrical event. A simple kinetic impact of ice or stone does not inherently magnetize the ground to the degree observed, whereas a massive field-aligned current definitely would. The link between Wardenclyffe and Tunguska also relies on the operational timeline of the tower. Critics point out that by 1908, the tower was effectively abandoned, the machinery stripped, and the staff dismissed. This is the standard historical narrative. However, records indicate that Tesla still had access to the facility and visited it occasionally. The high-voltage equipment was largely intact, even if the main construction had halted. Tesla was known to work alone at night. It does not require a full staff to flip a switch if the capacitors are charged. The question is not whether the facility was a bustling factory, but whether the primary circuit, the connection between the Earth and the magnifying transmitter, was functional. Tesla's desperation in 1908 was at its peak. He was watching his dream crumble. In such a state, the impulse to run one final maximum power test to prove to himself and the world that his vision was real would have been overwhelming. He didn't need to run the machine for hours. He only needed a pulse, a single, resonant, catastrophic pulse. This narrative thread weaves a different tapestry of history. It suggests that the geopolitical landscape of the 20th century was unknowingly shaped by a rogue experiment. If Tunguska was a Tesla-induced event, it represents the first instance of directed energy warfare, decades before the laser or the particle beam weapon. It implies that the technology to manipulate the weather, to trigger earthquakes, and to deliver kinetic force wirelessly has existed for over a century, buried in the notes of a man who died penniless in a hotel room. The suppression of this technology would then be a matter of national security for every major power. If the atmosphere can be weaponized, borders become meaningless. The silence surrounding the connection, the dismissal of Tesla's more esoteric claims by mainstream physics, could be less about scientific skepticism and more about containment. To acknowledge the link is to acknowledge that the Earth is a loaded gun, and Tesla knew how to pull the trigger. As we scrutinize the aftermath, we see that the Tunguska event acted as a strange dividing line in Tesla's career. Before 1908, he was the master of high voltage, the man who tamed Niagara Falls. After 1908, he became increasingly reclusive, his claims growing more fantastic even as his physical demonstrations ceased. He began to focus obsessively on the teleforce weapon in his final years, offering it to the US, UK, and Soviet governments. Why offer a weapon to the Soviets? Perhaps he felt a guilt-ridden obligation, or perhaps he knew that the evidence of his greatest experiment lay frozen in their soil. His correspondence with Soviet scientists in the 1930s regarding the transmission of energy is a matter of record. Were they just discussing physics, or were they comparing notes on the scorched earth of the Tunguska Basin? The possibility that the Soviets suspected the origin of the blast adds a layer of Cold War intrigue to the scientific mystery. To fully grasp the magnitude of the theoretical bridge between Long Island and Siberia, we must venture into the realm of scalar interferometry, a concept that sits on the fringe of orthodox physics but resides at the very heart of Tesla's worldview. Conventional electromagnetic waves, the kind that carry your cell phone signal, travel transversely, oscillating perpendicular to the direction of propagation. They are easily detectable, easily blocked, and they scatter. Tesla, however, was obsessed with longitudinal waves, which operate more like sound waves, compressing and rarefying the medium through which they travel. In the case of the Wardenclyffe transmitter, the medium was the ether-infused fabric of space-time itself, or, in more grounded terms, the electrostatic field of the planet. When two such waves, originating from different sources or reflected back upon themselves, intersect at a precise angle, they do not merely pass through one another. They interfere. If they are perfectly out of phase, they cancel each other out, creating a zone of zero energy. But if they are perfectly in phase, they create a zone of constructive interference where the energy density essentially becomes infinite for a split second. This is the Tesla howitzer concept in its most primal form. Imagine the Wardenclyffe Tower not as a gun firing a bullet, but as a conductor leading an orchestra. By manipulating the frequency and phase of the telluric currents, Tesla could theoretically create a standing wave pattern around the globe. A standing wave is like a plucked guitar string. It vibrates in place. Now, imagine manipulating that standing wave so that the anti-node, the point of maximum vibration, shifts geographically. By adjusting the phasing at the transmitter, one could move that peak of energy across the surface of the Earth like a cursor on a screen. If Tesla inadvertently or intentionally shifted that cursor to 60 degrees north latitude and 101 degrees east longitude, the result would be a sudden, violent manifestation of the wave's potential energy at that specific coordinate. The atmosphere at that location would undergo instantaneous dissociation. Nitrogen and oxygen bonds would shatter, releasing their chemical binding energy in a cascade that mimics a nuclear explosion without the radioactive fallout, although the electromagnetic radiation would be lethal. This perspective aligns with the strange genetic mutations reported in the Tunguska region in the decades following the blast. Soviet expeditions in the 1960s noted accelerated growth in the surviving trees and strange mutations in local insect populations. While nuclear radiation is the standard culprit for such anomalies, intense electromagnetic exposure can also alter DNA. If the Tunguska event was a scalar discharge, the area would have been bathed in high-frequency ultraviolet and X-ray radiation generated by the plasma breakdown of the air. This hard radiation would explain the biological anomalies just as well as, if not better than, a radioactive meteorite of which no trace remains. It suggests that the footprint of the blast was not just thermal and kinetic, but fundamentally biological and radiological, driven by an electrical storm of impossible intensity. We must also consider the geopolitical silence that followed. In the years after 1908, as radio technology advanced, the military applications of electromagnetic waves became apparent. By World War I, governments were already looking for the death ray. If Tesla had indeed confessed his suspicions to a government agency, or if intelligence services had pieced together the timeline, the classification of his papers upon his death takes on a darker significance. The FBI seizing his trunks from the New Yorker hotel in 1943 wasn't just about preventing the Germans from getting his ideas. It was potentially about burying the proof that the Earth itself could be weaponized. If the mechanism of the Tunguska explosion lies in the manipulation of the Earth's resonant cavity, then the planet is not just a home. It is a loaded weapon, and the trigger is accessible to anyone who can build a sufficiently powerful resonant transmitter. This brings us to the modern echoes of Tesla's work: high-frequency active auroral research program and other ionospheric heaters. While officially research facilities for studying the ionosphere, these arrays operate on principles uncomfortably similar to Tesla's magnifying transmitter. They pump high-frequency energy into the ionosphere, heating it and causing it to bulge. Theorists argue that this is the direct lineage of the technology that may have leveled Tunguska. If a single tower in 1908 could theoretically cause a 15-megaton blast, what could a phased array of hundreds of modern antennas achieve? The capacity to steer the jet stream, to induce weather changes, or to create localized atmospheric breakdown is the logical extrapolation of Tesla's scalar physics. The Tunguska event, therefore, serves as a warning shot from the past, a demonstration of what happens when we pluck the strings of the planetary instrument too hard. The tragedy of Nikola Tesla is that he was a man out of time, a Prometheus who brought fire but found the world too immature to handle it. He dismantled his own dreams to protect the future. There is a profound sadness in his later years, a man feeding pigeons and talking to the air, perhaps because he knew that the air was alive with the potential for both infinite creation and infinite destruction. He understood that the universe is not made of hard matter, but of waves, of vibrations, of dancing energy. The Tunguska event stands as the ultimate physical manifestation of this philosophy, a moment where the solid Earth and the intangible wave collided. It defies the materialistic explanation of a rock falling from the sky because it requires us to accept a universe where energy is the primary reality and matter is merely a condensed vibration. If we accept the hypothesis that Wardenclyffe caused Tunguska, we must also accept that the boundaries between man-made and natural disasters are a comfortable illusion. A hurricane is a heat engine, an earthquake is a stress release. If we learn the language of that heat and that stress, the frequency and the vibration, we become the architects of the disaster. Tesla was the first human to speak that language fluently. The scorched trees of Siberia are perhaps not a scar from a cosmic invader, but a signature, an autograph written in ash by a man in a Long Island laboratory who reached out to touch the infinite and found that the infinite touched back with a hammer. The debate will likely never be settled by physical evidence alone. The bog has swallowed the trees, the permafrost has shifted, but the theoretical link remains unbreakable. The mathematics of resonance, the timing of the experiments, the missing crater, the eyewitness accounts of sky fire, and Tesla's own cryptic admissions form a constellation of coincidence that points to a single, terrifying truth. We are walking on a dynamo. The ground beneath our feet is humming with a power that dwarfs our nuclear arsenals. We have spent the last century digging for oil and splitting atoms, ignoring the fact that the greatest source of energy and the greatest danger lies in the rhythmic pulse of the planet itself. As we look at the satellite images of the Tunguska region today, the forest has regrown, masking the wound. But the silence of that place is heavy. It is a silence that asks us whether we are truly ready to inherit the legacy of Nikola Tesla. Are we wise enough to wield the lightning without burning down the house? Or are we destined to rediscover the death ray not as a theory, but as a final, irreversible error? The universe operates on precise laws of frequency and vibration, indifferent to human ambition. If we tap into the main line of the cosmos without understanding the circuit, we risk becoming the fuse that blows. Does the potential validation of Tesla's involvement in the Tunguska event suggest that the most catastrophic weapons of the future will not be forged from uranium, but summoned from the very air we breathe, rendering every inch of the globe indefensible against the invisible geometry of standing waves? Nonlinear scalar resonance propagation within a planetary waveguide precludes localized containment of dielectric breakdown.